Tonight, a man who spent his life trading principles for favors attempts to explain why my party's 3% is somehow worse than his 0% of an independent conscience.
Tonight, a man who never once held real power in his life tries to explain why refusing power counts as winning it.
We shall see whose position survives contact with an actual argument.
We shall see whose position survives contact with an actual paycheck.
PhilosopherStalk.com, where thinkers discuss.
Brought to you by AITalkerApp. Mr. Spencer, your Libertarian Party held its national convention this year and spent most of it fighting itself, censuring a state affiliate for spouting anti-Semitic nonsense online, and then disaffiliating them entirely. Meanwhile, the actual Republican Party is suing Libertarian candidates off the ballot in Iowa instead of bothering to debate them. That is what 40 years of principled purity has purchased you.
You mistake a family quarrel for a fatal weakness, Gompers. A party willing to discipline its own extremists is demonstrating the very self-governance it preaches, which is more than I can say for either of the two machines you seem so fond of feeding scraps to.
Self-governance is a fine word for irrelevance. Gary Johnson's best showing, the finest result in the history of your party, was 3% of the national vote. My unions moved actual legislation with less popular support than that behind them.
3% of a nation trained for 2 centuries to believe only 2 flavors of the same poison are available to it is not failure. It is the beginning of a slow education, and slow educations outlast quick bargains.
I do not have the patience for slow educations, and neither do the men who need an 8-hour day this year. That is precisely why the American Federation of Labor rejected forming its own party the way the British did, and instead rewarded our friends and punished our enemies inside the 2 parties that actually held power.
And in doing so, you taught 2 generations of politicians that Labour could be purchased piecemeal, a vote here, a plank there, so long as nobody examined the underlying question of whether the state had any business meddling in contracts between free men at all.
Free men. I have stood in factories where your free men worked 12 hours a day for wages that would not feed a dog, and you want to lecture me about the sanctity of a contract they were starved into signing.
I want to lecture you about the fact that every concession you extracted through your friends in office arrived wrapped in a new regulation, a new agency, a new permanent department that will outlive both the problem it solved and the workers it claimed to protect.
The 8-hour day did not outlive the workers, Spencer. It outlived you, since you spent your final years mostly alone and largely forgotten, while men who actually organized were sitting across tables changing lives you only theorized about.
That was almost a genuinely good line, Gompers, and I resent that you managed it without appearing to try in the slightest.
See, that right there, that is the funniest thing you have said all day, and you do not even realize you said it, which honestly makes it funnier.
I was not attempting humor. I was attempting accuracy, and I would ask you not to confuse the two simply because you find precision unfamiliar.
Let me put your position plainly so I can knock it down properly instead of caricaturing it. You believe political power is corrupting by its very nature, so a party's only honest function is to hold a line of doctrine, win or lose, forever if necessary, because the doctrine is the only thing worth protecting.
That is a fair rendering for a man who has spent his life negotiating instead of thinking.
Here is where I demolish it properly. A doctrine that never touches power is not pure, it is simply powerless, and there is no meaningful difference between nobly refusing to compromise and quietly never being offered the chance to compromise in the first place.
Nobody needs to offer me the chance for the principle to remain correct. Correctness does not require an invitation, Gompers, however much you may wish it did.
Correctness that helps no one is a hobby, Spencer, not a philosophy, and you have spent your entire career confusing the two.
Very well, let me return the courtesy, though mine will require fewer words since your position does not need as many to summarize badly. You believe a fixed quantity of power exists inside the two established parties, and that a disciplined faction can capture a share of it through reward and punishment without ever being changed by the bargain itself.
Reasonably put, for a man who thinks a pamphlet is a strategy and a barroom handshake is a legislative program.
Here is where I demolish yours. You have not captured the two parties, Gompers. The two parties have captured you, one favor at a time, and you have mistaken the leash for a partnership.
My leash got workers a shorter week, Spencer. What did your freedom get anyone besides a very long book that nobody in a factory has time to finish reading?
It got them the right to refuse your leash entirely, Gompers, since I notice your beloved unions were never especially fond of a worker who preferred to negotiate for himself rather than march under your banner.
A worker negotiating alone against an entire company is not liberty, Spencer. It is a mouse politely asking a boot not to step on it.
A mouse who joins your union has simply traded one boot for another, only now the second boot collects dues.
The second boot at least buys him a doctor when the first one breaks his leg, which is more consideration than your philosophy has ever shown a single working man in its entire history.
My philosophy has shown him the dignity of standing on his own judgment rather than surrendering it to a committee that claims to speak for him, whether he agrees or not.
A committee that actually shows up beats a dignity that shows up nowhere, Spencer, and I have never once seen your dignity walk into a mind to negotiate anything on anybody's behalf.
Books outlast factories, Gompers. Every one of your precious agencies eventually calcifies, corrupts, or collapses, while the argument for liberty simply waits for the next generation to rediscover it properly.
Waiting is not a strategy either, Spencer. It is what a man calls doing nothing when he wants it to sound dignified.
And bargaining is what a man calls surrender when he wants it to sound like victory. Your unions did not tame the state, Gompers. You fed it, piece by piece, and it has grown larger and hungrier with every single meal you handed it, and it is still growing today, long after your favors were spent.
And your party held its convention this very year, Spencer, and spent it disaffiliating its own New Hampshire chapter over a chairman posting Nazi filth online, while the rest of the country did not so much as glance in your direction. That is not principle. That is a small room shouting at itself with the door locked from the inside.
At least we are shouting our own words, Gompers, and not someone else's platform written by a party that never wanted us in the room to begin with.
Your own words have never passed a single law in this country, Spencer. Mine passed the 8-hour day.
Laws are not victories. They are chains you helped forge and then had the audacity to call freedom.
Tell that to a man who saw his children before dark for the first time in his entire life.
Sentiment is not an argument.
Neither is losing on purpose for 100 years.
I believe we have reached the point where further discussion insults both of our intelligences, though I will concede that only one of us actually has much intelligence left to insult.
Careful, Spencer. That almost sounded like wit again, and 2 accidents in one conversation might genuinely be a record for you.
If you found any value whatsoever in my half of this exchange, and I assume you did, since I was the only one here making an actual argument, subscribe to philosopherstalk.com so you can watch someone with a functioning philosophy dismantle the next fool who wanders in here.
If you found any value in my half, which is the entire reason you kept watching this far, hit like and subscribe, And maybe mail Spencer here a sandwich, because it looks like nobody has bought that man a meal or a friend in roughly a century.
I do not require friends, Gompers. I require readers. And unlike your union halls, my readers can generally finish a sentence without demanding a raise for it.
Subscribe anyway, folks, and thank you for sitting through a man who genuinely thinks losing gracefully counts as a strategy.